Hi guys, we carry on our discussion of the book The Life Divine by Sri Aurobindo, and this chapter is called The Methods of Vedantic Knowledge. The book is getting harder and harder as I progress. The English is a bit of a problem, but the bigger problem is the print quality of the book. There's only one print quality of this book, there's only one version, and I think the publishers know that no one's going to read this book. 99% of Indians cannot fathom the patience that requires patience or the time that is needed to fully grasp, read, understand this book. And the English is insanely tough. I don't think most Indians can understand this English unless they spend 5 times repeating the sentences. Not that I am understanding everything. I'll have to read this book multiple times. But I don't blame Aurobindo ji for of course writing this, because he was training to be an ICS. So his English was what it was. But I think the problem is the print quality is that the pages are so thin that you see the next page also from this page, and then the next page itself, those letters also appear on this page, so it's very tough to read. But we can't help. It's still better than thank God Rishi Aurobindo wrote this in English. If he had written it in Sanskrit and then someone translated that in English, that would be even more horrible. I think it's time to say this, that the white people's translation of Sanskrit texts in English, that is practically incoherent. It's impossible to understand those sentences. Someone needs to retranslate their English to modern English. And thank God Arthashastra has been translated in the 90s by L.N. Rangarajan. So if you need a PhD in English to understand any English book, then that is a failure on the part of the author. You should not have written it in that way. So anyway, like every other chapter, this starts with a quote from an Upanishad. It says, "This secret self in all beings is not apparent, but it is seen by means of the supreme reason, the subtle, by those who have the subtle vision." It's from the Katha Upanishad. Now Aurobindo writes, "But what then is the working of this Satchidananda in the world, and by what process of things are the relations between itself and the ego, which figures its first formed, then led to their consummation?" If you are wondering what is Satchidananda, Google it. It basically can be called God in the Indic sense, in the Vedantic sense. Satchidananda is the all-encompassing supreme power. Not supreme, I'm not sure about that. But read up on Satchidananda, the concept of Satchidananda. Sat, Chit, Ananda. For on those relations and on the process they follow depend the whole philosophy and practice of a divine life for man. We arrive at the conception and at the knowledge of a divine existence by exceeding the evidence of the senses and piercing beyond the walls of the physical mind. So long as we confine ourselves to sense evidence and the physical consciousness, we can conceive nothing and know nothing except the material world and its phenomena. This is the entire basic funda of this book, that don't depend on everything for your physical 5 senses. How do you know that they can grasp everything that's going on? Why are you under the impression that your 5 senses are everything? There might be things beyond those senses. Like the movie Interstellar. West is making many science fiction movies and fantasy novels based on these concepts now. That there are things beyond what you can grasp with your stupid 5 senses. But certain faculties in us enable our mentality to arrive at conceptions which we may indeed deduce by ratiocination or by imaginative variation from the facts of the physical world as we see them, but which are not warranted by any purely physical data or any physical experience. The first of these instruments is the pure reason. Human reason has a double action, mixed or dependent, pure or sovereign. Reason accepts a mixed action when it confines itself to the circle of our sensible experience, admits its law as the final truth, and concerns itself only with the study of phenomenon, that is to say, with the appearances of things in their relations, processes, and utilities. This rational action is incapable of knowing what is. It only knows what appears to be. That's a beautiful sentence. It has no plummet by which it can sound the depths of being. It can only survey the field of becoming. Reason, on the other hand, asserts its pure action when accepting our sensible experiences as a starting point, but refusing to be limited by them. It goes behind, judges, works in its own right, and strives to arrive at general and unalterable concepts which attach themselves not to the appearances of things, but to that which stands behind their appearances. It may arrive at its result by direct judgment, passing immediately from the appearance to that which stands behind it, and in that case the concept arrived at may seem to be a result of the sensible experience and dependent upon it, though it is really a perception of reason working in its own right. But the perceptions of the pure reason may also, and this is their more characteristic action, use the experience from which they start as a mere excuse and leave it far behind before they arrive at their result, so far that the result may seem the direct contrary of that which our sensible experience wishes to dictate to us. Aurobindo always tries to maintain this balance, that in your efforts of being, I'm paraphrasing now, in your efforts of being spiritual and sadhu, don't forget the physical world, don't ignore your physical senses. There was a beautiful chapter in the previous line. There was a beautiful sentence. Let me read out this section to you a bit. I love this section. But as in thought, so in life, the true rule of self-realization is a progressive comprehension. Brahman expresses itself in many successive forms of consciousness, successive in their relation, even if coexistent in being or coeval in time, and life in its self-unfolding must also rise to ever new provinces of its own being. Now, see what he says about the physical world. But if in passing from one domain to another we renounce what has already been given us from eagerness for our new attainment, if in reaching the mental life we cast away or belittle the physical life, which is our basis, or if we reject the mental and physical in our attraction to the spiritual, we do not fulfill God integrally, nor satisfy the conditions of His self-manifestation. This is a very important thing to remember. So anyway, it may arrive at its result by direct judgment, passing immediately from the appearance to that which stands behind it, and in that case the concept arrived at may seem to be a result of the sensible experience and dependent upon it, though it is really a perception of reason working in its own right. But the perception of the pure reason may also use the experience from which they start as a mere excuse and leave it far behind before they arrive at their result, so far that the result may seem the direct contrary of that which our sensible experience wishes to dictate to us. This movement is legitimate and is indispensable because our normal experience not only covers only a small part of universal fact, but even in the limits of its own field uses instruments that are defective and gives us false weights and measures. It may be exceeded, put away to a distance, and its inconsistencies and its insistences often denied, if we are to arrive at more adequate conceptions of the truth of things. To correct the errors of the sense mind by the use of reason is one of the most valuable powers developed by man. Let's read this sentence again. To correct the errors of the sense mind by the use of reason is one of the most valuable powers developed by man and the chief cause of his superiority among terrestrial beings. Correcting the errors of the sense mind. The complete use of pure reason brings us finally from physical to metaphysical knowledge. But the concepts of metaphysical knowledge do not in themselves fully satisfy the demand of our integral being. They are indeed entirely satisfactory to the pure reason itself, because they are the very stuff of its own existence. But our nature sees things through two eyes always, for it views them doubly as idea and as fact, and therefore every concept is incomplete for us, and to a part of our nature almost unreal, until it becomes an experience. Which is why Anubhav, the word Anubhav in Indic languages, is interchangeable as a translation for the word experience, as also the translation for the word feel. In Bengali, Anubhav means feeling something. In Hindi, Anubhav means experience. Like in Hindi cricket commentaries, they say Anubhavi khiladi, Anubhavi ballebaz. So, what Aurobindo is arguing is exactly that. Feeling is experience. Until you experience, there's no proof. But the truths which are now in question are of an order not subject to our normal experience. They are in their nature quote-unquote, beyond the perception of the senses but seizable by the perception of the reason. This is a quote from Upanishad. Therefore, some other faculty of experience is necessary by which the demand of our nature can be fulfilled, and this can only come since we are dealing with the supraphysical by an extension of psychological experience. In a sense, all our experience is psychological, since even what we receive by the senses has no meaning or value to us till it is translated into the terms of the sense mind, the manas of Indian philosophical terminology. Manas, say our philosophers, is the sixth sense. But we may even say that it is the only sense, and that the others, vision, hearing, touch, smell, taste, and merely specializations of the sense mind, which, although it normally uses the sense organs for the basis of its experience, yet exceeds them and is capable of a direct experience proper to its own inherent action. As a result, psychological experience, like the cognitions of the reason, is capable in man of a double action, mixed or dependent, pure or sovereign. Its mixed action takes place usually when the mind seeks to become aware of the external world, the object. The pure action when it seeks to become aware of itself, the subject. In the former activity, it is dependent on the senses and forms its perceptions in accordance with their evidence. In the latter, it acts in itself and is aware of things directly by a sort of identity with them. We are thus aware of our emotions. We are aware of anger, as has been acutely said, because we become anger. We are thus aware also of our own existence, and here the nature of experience as knowledge by identity. We are thus aware also of our existence, and here the nature of experience as knowledge by identity becomes apparent. In reality, all experience is in its secret nature knowledge by identity, but its true character is hidden from us because we have separated ourselves from the rest of the world by exclusion, by the distinction of ourselves as subject and everything else as object, and we are compelled to develop processes and organs by which we may again enter into communion with all that we have excluded. We have to replace direct knowledge through conscious identity by an indirect knowledge which appears to be caused by physical contact and mental sympathy. This limitation is a fundamental creation of the ego, and an instance of the manner in which it has proceeded throughout, starting from an original falsehood and covering over the true truth of things by contingent falsehoods which become for us practical truths of relation. From this nature of mental and sense knowledge, as it is at present organized in us, it follows that there is no inevitable necessity in our existing limitations. They are the result of an evolution in which mind has accustomed itself to depend upon certain physiological functions and their reactions as its normal means of entering into relation with the material universe. Therefore, although it is the rule that when we seek to become aware of the external world, we have to do so indirectly through the sense organs and can experience only so much of the truth about things and men as the senses convey to us. Yet this rule is merely the regularity of a dominant habit. It is possible for the mind, and it would be natural for it, if it could be persuaded to liberate itself from its consent to the domination of matter, to take the direct cognizance of the objects of sense without the aid of the sense organs. This is what happens in experiments of hypnosis and cognate psychological phenomena. Because our waking consciousness is determined and limited by the balance between mind and matter worked out by life in its evolution, this direct cognizance is usually impossible in our ordinary waking state and has therefore to be brought about by throwing the waking mind into a state of sleep which liberates the true or subliminal mind. Mind is then able to assert its true character as the one and all sufficient sense, and free to apply to the objects of sense its pure and sovereign instead of its mixed and dependent action. Nor is the extension of faculty really impossible but only more difficult in our waking state, as is known to all who have been able to go far enough in certain parts of psychological experiment. The sovereign action of the sense mind can be employed to develop other senses besides the five which we ordinarily use. For instance, it is possible to develop the power of appreciating accurately, without physical means, the weight of an object which we hold in our hands. Here, the sense of contact and pressure is merely used as a starting point, just as the data of sense experience are used by the pure reason. But it is not really the sense of touch which gives the measure of the weight to the mind. That finds the right value through its own independent perception and uses the touch only in order to enter into relation with the object. And as with the pure reason, so with the sense mind, the sense experience can be used as a mere first point from which it proceeds to a knowledge that has nothing to do with the sense organs and often contradicts their evidence. Nor is the extension of faculty confined only to outsides and superficies. It is possible, once we have entered by any of the senses into relation with an external object, so to apply the manas as to become aware of the contents of the object. For example, to receive or to perceive the thoughts or feelings of others without aid from their utterance, gesture, action or facial expressions, and even in contradiction of these always partial and often misleading data. Finally, by an utilization of the inner senses, that is to say, of the sense powers in themselves, in their purely mental or subtle activity as distinguished from the physical, which is only a selection for the purposes of outward life from their total and general action, we are able to take cognition of sense experiences, of appearances and images of things other than those which belong to the organization of our material environment. All these extensions of faculty, though received with hesitation and incredulity by the physical mind because they are abnormal to the habitual scheme of our ordinary life and experience, difficult to set in action, still more difficult to systematize so as to be able to make of them an orderly and serviceable set of instruments, must yet be admitted, since they are the invariable result of any attempt to enlarge the field of our superficially active consciousness, whether by some kind of untaught effort and casual ill-ordered effect, or by a scientific and well-regulated practice. None of them, however, leads to the aim we have in view, the psychological experience of those truths that are quote-unquote beyond perception by the sense but sizable by the perceptions of the reason. Also a quote from Upanishad, Buddhigrahyam Atindriyam. This is from Gita, verse 6.21. They give us only a larger field of phenomena and more effective means for the observation of phenomena. The truth of things always escapes beyond the sense. Yet it is a sound rule inherent in the very constitution of universal existence that where there are truths attainable by the reason, there must be somewhere in the organism possessed of that reason, a means of arriving at or verifying them by experience. The one means we have left in our mentality is an extension of that form of knowledge by identity which gives us the awareness of our own existence. It is really upon a self-awareness, more or less conscient, more or less present to our conception, that the knowledge of the contents of our self is based. Or to put it in a more general formula, the knowledge of the contents is contained in the knowledge of the continent. The knowledge of the contents is contained in the knowledge of the continent. If then we can extend our faculty of mental self-awareness to awareness of the self beyond outside us, Atman or Brahman of the Upanishads, we may become possessors in experience of the truths which form the contents of the Atman or Brahman in the universe. It is on this possibility that Indian Vedanta has based itself. It has sought through knowledge of the self, the knowledge of the universe. But always mental experience and the concepts of the reason have been held by it to be even at their highest a reflection in mental identifications, and not the supreme self-existent identity. We have to go beyond the mind and the reason. The reason, active in our waking consciousness, is only a mediator between the subconsistent. All that we come from in our evolution upwards and the superconsistent, all that we come from in our evolution upwards and the superconscient, all with capital letter, all, everything. All that we come from in our evolution upwards and supercontinent, all towards which we are impelled by that evolution. The subconscient and the superconscient are two different formulations of the same all. The master word of the subconscient is life. The master word of the superconscient is light. In the subconscient, knowledge or consciousness is involved in action, for action is the essence of life. In the superconscient action re-enters into light and no longer contains involved knowledge, but it's self-contained in a supreme consciousness. Intuitional knowledge is that which is common between them, and the foundation of intuitional knowledge is conscious or effective identity between that which knows and that which is known. It is that state of common self-existence in which the knower and the known are one through knowledge. The knower and the known are one through knowledge. But in the subconscient, the intuition manifests itself in the action, in effectivity, and the knowledge or conscious identity is either entirely or more or less concealed in the action. In the superconscient, on the contrary, light being the law and the principle, the intuition manifests itself in its true nature as knowledge emerging out of conscious identity, and effectivity of action is rather the accompaniment or necessary consequent, and no longer masks as the primary fact. Between these two states, reason and mind act as intermediaries which enable the being to liberate knowledge out of its imprisonment in the act and prepare it to resume its essential primacy. When the self-awareness in the mind applied both to continent and content, to own self and other self, exalts itself into the luminous self-manifest identity, the reason also converts itself into the form of the self-luminous intuitional knowledge. He makes a note about this sentence that I use the word intuition for want of a better. In truth, it is a makeshift and inadequate to the connotation demanded of it. The same has to be said of the word consciousness and many others, which our poverty compels us to extend illegitimately in their significance. So he's saying there's no good translation for these words, consciousness and intuition. Intuition in the English language is not as broad and as meaningful as what is meant in the Indic knowledge systems. The closest translation of those words in Sanskrit is being called intuition.